Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of the Fast Forward Expert Roundtable here from Vertical Alliance Group, Infinity Workforce Solutions, Dismantling DataQs. That is what we're going to talk about today, the basics of DataQ operation, what you need to do to have a good result, what you need to avoid, and then we're going to be taking your questions as well as we're going through this. Can be about DataQ, but can be on other subjects as well. Due to the nature of our guest with us today. Now, my name, for those of you who have not participated in one of our virtual events before, is Craig Hart. I am with our events team here at Vertical Alliance Group, and my co-host, as always, is Mr. Mark Ray. Mark is a former industry executive with over 30 years experience. He is a trucking, been a lot of different hats in the trucking industry, including a certified safety director. And he is also now part of the board of directors with North Central Texas Interlink and works a lot both within and without the transportation industry as an advisor. And our guest here today, though, the person that you definitely are here to see and hear from is Chris Turner. Chris is the director of crash and data programs with the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. He is a former state highway patrol officer with many, many years of experience that we are going to be relying on today to talk about DataQ. Mark, Chris, I know we have a lot of ground to cover. Thank you both for joining us today. And let's go ahead and get this thing underway. But one thing before we do, this is an interactive thing for those of you who are joining us today. So we do want your questions as we're going through this. Two different ways you can do that. One, you can send it through the chat window. You just click on the chat icon on your menu at the top of the page, open that up, and then if you go to the bottom, there's a section that says to, and make sure that says hosts and panelists. So actually, let's change that to everyone. Make sure that changed to everyone so even people in the chat can see the questions that you are asking us. You can also use the Q&A function, which is on your menu bar as well. And that way we can review those. We do already have some questions that have come in before the event started, which is great, and we'll get to those. But Mark, pleasure to see you again. Chris, pleasure to see you again too, sir. It's been a few months.
Yep, I'm super excited to be here today. I can talk about DataQs all day. I enjoy them, and hopefully everyone will get something out of today's presentation.
Excellent.
Well, and the other thing is we know there's a lot of misinterpretations and rumors about DataQ, so I'm glad we have such a large grouping today that maybe we can put some of those to bed. So thank you for what you do, Chris, for our industry to bridge that gap between enforcement and industry practitioners. Thank you.
Absolutely. Are we ready to get started?
Yes, sir, we are.
By chance, were you able to get those poll questions?
Yes.
Let's go ahead and pull that up first. So everyone, before I introduce myself briefly and then CVSA, who are we? I want to have just one set of poll questions, one to get everybody going and answering questions right off the bat, so we know we have everybody engaged, and two, so I have a better idea about who's in the audience. So if you could take a minute and answer those, and we'll glance at the results here in just a minute. That'll let me know where I need to spend a little bit more time during the presentation. We've got a lot of information, but we also have plenty of time to go over it today, and I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for questions and answers.
Excellent. Looks like folks are answering everything for us, which is great. We appreciate that. Leave it up a little bit longer here. I love how you phrased that first question. No, I have not had the pleasure of using the system. Very nice. Awesome, awesome.
All right, where are we at? How are we doing?
We've had it up almost a minute here, a couple more seconds, then we'll close it out.
Yeah, don't be shy.
Again, all the responses are anonymous, so we just want to see by percentage who of our audience has experience with the system and in different facets of it.
We should have given an award for the people who've been successful how many times, and you win a prize.
All right, let's go ahead and close this out here. Awesome. All right. And I will let my man behind the curtain share the results with you, Chris, so you can see What's going on?
91%.
What's that last one?
Oh, the last one,
That's
successful,
okay.
57%, not successful, 42.
All right, great. So that really helps me with some direction. We do have about a little under 10% of you who are not really familiar with the system. So for those of you who are, hang with us while we get through this first session, okay? I want to make sure we're inclusive to everybody, and the folks who haven't had a chance to use the system or really know what it is, I want to give them an opportunity. As you can tell by the way, we're talking and speaking to each other today. We've all met and talked to each other before, but that also goes to how I want this conversation to be. I don't really want this to be a lecture. So as you have things you want to talk about, or as I'm moving through this, if you have questions, I want to keep it conversational. I really feel like that's going to be the best way we get through this most productively today. So that slide's been up there a little while. Who's the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance? You've probably read it, but we're a conglomeration. We represent all of the jurisdictions in North America, Canada, the US, and Mexico, and their lead agency contacts for the Motor Carrier Safety Assistance Program. That's the MCSA grant that the feds pay. So folks in their jurisdictions complete truck inspections on large trucks and buses. And as you can see there, our goal is uniformity, compatibility, and reciprocity. We want a very similar inspection that you get in Texas to be the same you get in Oklahoma and Kansas. There may be some state-specific stuff, but on a federal level, they should be identical, or as nearly to identical as they can be. We want reciprocity between Mexico and Canada and the US, knowing that they're not going to be the same always, or we can make those, make them reciprocal in the type of inspection and interaction with law enforcement. That's what we want to do. Our other members are Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. They write the regs. CVSA writes the out of service. NHTSA, NTSB, TRB, if you can think of a federal agency and an acronym for them, they're probably members if they have something to do with motor vehicle safety. And then another one of our biggest members, and it actually outweighs our other jurisdictional members, are our associate members. And that's folks like you who are on this presentation today: motor carriers, shippers, IPs, manufacturers, vehicle manufacturers. We have the ADS developers, the automatic, the driverless vehicle developers. We have Waymo. So a ton of people, including component manufacturers for brakes. All of them come together at our conferences and help us write the out of service criteria and petition the federal government for different things that we believe will be safe and also further industry. So really both are our goals. We are committed, and you can see they're dedicated to driver and vehicle safety. We want everyone to get where they're going safely, but we also want business to be able to thrive in their ability to transport their loads across the US. It's a huge part of our gross national product, and we know that. We respect it, and we support you all. So let's jump in. Let's see, don't change the slide just yet. Who am I? Just a quick background. Chris Turner, Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. I deal with our data, which is one of the things we're going to talk about today with DataQs, a judicial outreach. For CVSA, I run our road check program, and I'm a national trainer for law enforcement, prosecutor, judges across the US. In my previous life, that's probably even more relevant here, when I was the commander of the Kansas Highway Patrol, spent a lot of time reviewing DataQs, reconstructions, crashes, impairment. So thousands of them over my time with the patrol. So that's my background. Okay, let's jump into the objectives. So our first objective is going to be, I want to make sure that we're able to explain the DataQs system to you, that you can explain it to others, how it's important to carriers, shippers, and drivers, and law enforcement. Next slide. I want to be able to manage your expectations. You'll see later on that the DataQs, or the ability to be successful, is tremendous within the system, but manage expectations about when you should be successful, why things may take as long as they take, and how to use the system. And then finally, next slide, number 3, I want to make sure by the end of this presentation that you can explain the do's and don'ts of the DataQ system, and then prepare a really well-written DataQ that is likely to lead to you being successful in your challenge of your issue. So let's jump into my next header here, explaining the DataQ system and its importance to carriers, drivers, and law enforcement. It's very important to us as well. So next slide. I realize and understand completely what DataQs can feel like, right? We got Dwight screaming, whatever clip this is from my wife's favorite show, for The Office, obviously. And now I'll be walking by the room and I can recite lines. She listened to it so much. But really the website can feel like you're confused, you're lost, you're unsure, all those things that sign represents and talks about. And we want to clear that up today. So for the 10% of you who aren't familiar with DataQs, let's run down that first. The rest of you hang with us and we'll get to the really important information from you in the next two segments. So let's start off with what is FMCSA's DataQ system. You can read that. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time reading the slides to you. Essentially, as you can see, it was established in 2004. And what that act did was actually allow folks to be able to challenge census data that the federal government keeps on you. Let's translate that into a personal issue. If they had my social security number, which they do, but my address or my date of birth or my name, all that stuff, if they had it wrong, I could correct it. That's what it was supposed to be initially for the DataQ system. It was an opportunity for carriers and drivers to correct that census data, mainly carriers at the time that it came about. So since 2004, it has evolved into an incredibly robust and great program where now motor carriers, drivers, shippers, all the folks that we've talked about and we'll be talking about today can challenge a violation or an adjudicated citation or crash preventability. Because unlike when this started, for those of you who like me are pretty long in the tooth, we didn't have CSA. We didn't have basics. We didn't have percentages. What we had is the SMS. When I pulled a truck over, it had green, yellow, and red. Green means they didn't have any history from a client's review. Yellow meant they did, and red meant they had failed one or were conditional for some reason. Now there's way more information, but that also means the possibility of having that incorrect information out there now matters so much more with CSA and your basic scores and PSP to motor carriers. So let's talk about that. Next slide, please. So FMCSA and what they do with the data. You think, gosh, what does FMCSA do with all this? They're just trying to mess with my SMS and they're going to come in and do a compliance review. They're going to find me. The government wants the thumb on the man, so to speak, right? But really what FMCSA is trying to do is when they promulgate rules, they want to do it with the benefit of safety that we talked about, but also allowing industry to function. Now, I understand that changes with different administrations and different government roles. And let's kind of set that aside for a minute so we can get through this conversation, because I'm sure we could all go on forever about our opinions there. But when we talk about policy development, what is best for industry? Take, for example, the recent emergency declaration for Hurricane Ida and the relief that provided for hours of service, or any other emergency declaration. Want to help folks save lives, get industry there safely. Another way that they have used this data is to create the drug and alcohol clearinghouse. And we've seen that there are a lot of folks who've tested positive that we didn't know about and should have been prohibited performing safety sensitive operations until they were through their plan. But to the benefit of motor carriers, now let's take it a step further. The crash preventability determination program is the result of FMCSA listening to you all and developing that policy. So making sure stuff's not on your record. Go ahead, next slide, please. So some examples of what you can RDR. And I'm going to use some phrases. If I do and you don't know them, let me know. And RDR is actually doing what is the DataQ system. If you want to think of DataQs as just a website, like Google, so to speak. It is the location where FMCSA allows you to enter this information. But what you're actually doing is entering an RDR, or request for data review. Don't feel bad. Feel free to call it a DataQ. Everybody will know what you mean if you say you're going to DataQ something. But you can DataQ crashes that were not reportable, which is different than not preventable. Not preventable means, not at fault, it can prevent it. Not reportable means you weren't a CMB or you weren't towed away, serious injury, or fatality. You can also challenge anything that's on a roadside inspection or data collected during a compliance review, duplicate inspections, as well as request copies of a report. Next slide, please. So let's drill down just a little bit. What are the things that we're talking about? Whether it's an inspection, a post-crash inspection, or, and this is something you may not know, crashes that you're involved in don't necessarily have to be associated with an inspection. And most of the time they aren't. But that crash report goes through the state agency of record. In Kansas, for example, that's our Department of Transportation, and then back to our truck checking unit. And that is required by our grant to be uploaded from that accident rather than a post-crash report. Here are all the things you can challenge. It was assigned to the wrong driver, the wrong carrier, not reportable, duplicate record, missing record, incorrect information. And then also, again, you can request a report if you didn't receive one through the DataQ system. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. States may have an open records request that you have to comply with, but a large chunk of them are fulfilled through this system. All right, so next slide, please. So this will end our first session, this slide right here. But why is it important to you? Well, I touched on CSA, touched on SMS and the PSP and how that has changed since 2004 when it was called CSA 2010, right? When it started, CSA 2010 was implemented, I think, in 2011. So they were behind to start with, and now it's just called CSA. You're graded on your basics, essentially. Why is this important? Well, carriers need to make sure that they have the correct information in there, right? You want to make sure that your insurance rates are as low as they can be, that you're hired. If you're a carrier that does on-time shipments or anything else, you want to make sure that you have a positive reputation when people go to look at you as a carrier and you're not on FMCSA's list for an investigation or a compliance review. And then drivers. So you want to make sure that your information is correct. You want to make sure that it shows you as the good driver that you are. Maybe that's a bonus at your company. Maybe it's a new job that eventually you look for, and you want your PSP to be clean. You want it to accurately reflect the positive things that you have done. So you may think that it's not worth your time to file a DataQ. Hang with us. I can tell you that it is. You're going to see the results that folks have gleaned over this, and we're going to jump into that in our next two sections. So let's go to our next one. So the DataQ system, managing carrier and driver expectations of the system. Next slide, please. So why this is important, and you can see it's just one slide that says expectations. It's important that we understand what the success might be, but also, why is this taking so long? Things that I've heard. Good Lord, the state doesn't answer me. They don't answer me correctly. They've taken forever. But especially if we talk about the crash preventability determination program, my goodness, why does it take so long? So let's set some expectations, let you behind the curtain, and know what we're trying to do on our side. Just like law enforcement or folks who are doing the DataQs need to know what's going on in your half, I'm going to let you behind the curtain a little bit so you can see what we're dealing with. Next slide, please. Okay, so you guys can read through that, but this is stuff I'm going to highlight a little bit as we talk. We're looking at over 500,000 carriers that are interstate motor carriers that the states are responsible for. You've got an additional huge number that are intrastate only carriers, and those are going to usually be your not for hire, your private local carriers, your plumber may be a carrier in your state, things that don't haul for hire, but yet they are a commercial motor vehicle. You have 6.8 million drivers. That was in the 2020 FMCSA handbook, which is part of the materials that I provided for you. 3.5 million inspections, 5.9 million violations, 1 million out of service, 13 million registered trucks. I mean, there's a lot of them out there. And then, over 500,000 large trucks and buses, not necessarily commercial motor vehicles, but large trucks and buses involved in collision. So my point in showing you all that is, there's not a whole lot of law enforcement in the US and fewer feds. So there's about 13,000 roughly, plus or minus, in any given year, law enforcement officers who are certified to inspect a truck. And so as you can see from all of this data, some of it they generate, right? The number of inspections and out of service, but these folks are also responsible for trying to work those same crashes. We're going to talk about it in more depth later, but that's why your crash investigation may not be as professional as you think it should be on every crash. But I want to talk about why and how you can help yourself with that. So next slide, please. Okay, now here are the requests for DataQs. You saw the stuff that happens in the front end. Now in the back end, here's what we have to work with and what happens when a DataQ is begun. So you can see there's over 6,000 crash DataQs, and this is 2018 data is what I pulled. 68% of that had a data correction. On average, 2 weeks to close that from soup to nuts, start to finish, 14 days. That's great. Almost a 70% rate of correction. Inspection, over 40,000 data queues with a 65% rate of correction when you request that data queues. Carriers are requesting great data queues, and more often than not, if this were a jury trial, this would be a verdict in your favor, right? So preponderance of the evidence, more often than not on a civil side, you're going to win this. And then the other ones that are listed there just to get us to our total are investigations, registration, and request for reports. So this is worth it. Now, what's not included in here is crash preventability, and that, although it's through the same system, it's routed differently, and we will talk about that. So next slide, please. So Got my next one there?
Chris, could we presume those numbers are larger for 2020?
What's that? What was the question?
The numbers for 2020 or 2019, the pattern is the same.
Yeah, the patterns stay the same, mostly in 19. I didn't get into 20 and 21 data just because COVID has kind of messed some stuff up numbers wise. So in a typical year, I wanted to give you what was representative, but the success rates are equal to or higher than what you saw on the previous slide.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you go to the DataQ page, what happens? By the way, you'll get a copy of this PowerPoint. That link is functional. It will pop up and pull you to the website. So feel free to use it. This is the public site. Now, what I will tell you is that I would have to go to this site to sign up now because I am not a state user. I'm not a motor carrier. So I would have to use this site. And there's a lot of great stuff here too. You can see you have your analyst guide, which I provided for you as well, and some more additional information. So go ahead and go to the next slide. If you're a motor carrier, however, or law enforcement, they want you to use your portal, and let me explain why. So really critically important to know is the portal is the closest you're going to get without being a state authorized user to real-time data. You don't have access to MCMS. Some state users do. I did as an example for the OC for Kansas. And you're going to have information as being your own motor carrier organizational coordinator. So real-time or very near real-time access. Why is it different? If you think of MCMS, which is the website, the database that supports all this, it's one database, right? It goes out and feeds all those other websites you go to from FMCSA, whether it's ANI or SMS or PSP, but they're only taking snapshots once a month or once every 60 days of the data that's in MCMS. So your data is not real time. The portal is actually hitting MCMS or safer, depending, and it's going to give you really close to real-time data compared to, a snapshot that's 60 days old. So you want to use this. In addition to, the other great thing about using your portal is you can identify who you want in your company to be able to file a data queue. And then you have control as the organizational coordinator over who those folks are and what they can do within the system. All right, next slide. All right, so you get to choose the type of thing that you're going to request to be looked into. When you start a data queue, again, I'm talking about managing your expectations so you know what's going to happen when you log in. If your crash, your investigation, your inspection, registration, you need a copy of the report, whatever it is. And then the reason for your request, such as a crash not reportable, the incorrect violation, it's assigned to the wrong carrier. Shockingly, assigned to the wrong carrier is a huge one that we see and one that we definitely don't want to have on a carrier's profile. So once you work through this, if we go to the next slide, you're going to be asked to enter some specifics of that event, the report number, the date, the time, carrier info, which is your stuff, the driver info. And that is critical because it helps behind the scenes route it to the correct location, which we'll talk about on the very next slide. So you want to describe what you want reviewed. You're going to want to do this concisely, but with enough information that folks know where you're starting from. So you're just not starting in the middle of the story. Provide supplemental information. And these two, describing what you want and supplemental information, when we get into our next session about how to write a great data queue that's likely to be successful, these are the two that you're really going to want to hone in on. Describe what you want reviewed, provide that supplemental information. You're going to have a huge chance for success. And then you just have to certify at the end of it that it's you and the information you provided is correct. So next slide, please. So as we're talking about this, after you have entered all your stuff behind the scenes, data queue, again, which is the website, it's the file folder, it's the cabinet, takes that request for data review and sends it to the appropriate jurisdiction. So when I was working in Kansas, we started out with just a couple guys working data queues in 04 and 05. I started in 06. And then by 2011, we were just working them nonstop. But what happens is I'd get an email or a text, however I had it set up on my device, and notification that I needed to go in and open that data queue. And it starts what is a 10-day clock for the states. Now, I know you saw on an earlier slide, they were getting them done within 14 days and 15 days respectively. 10 days is the goal. Almost all states meet that, but there's a couple outliers out there that take longer, and probably for what you would agree would be a good reason. Some of those states, like Arizona, for example, they have an appeals process. It might stay open for 3 months, but you get the chance to appeal it up to 3 times, and that third time is in front of a board that includes a driver or motor carrier representative and law enforcement. So sometimes when they're older, they skew those numbers a little bit, but the overwhelming majority of these are worked easily within 10 days. So once your request is reviewed, the original officer may be consulted. And I know this is a sticking point. The original officer should always be consulted, just like your driver should always be consulted. The really sticking point is some states that original officer may work that data queue. It's obviously not the best practice, not what we want to happen. CVSA strongly recommends, so does FMCSA, that be an independent person within the agency who, of course, has to talk to the driver, get a copy of their video, make sure they have the correct inspection report, but we don't want them working the crash. I'll probably say that the crash or inspection, the data queue, I'll probably say this more than once, but so like being an attorney, when you get these data queues, they're not experts on what you got going on. So they have to get out, which is not an option, get smart, or they have to get some help. So, for example, I was a hazmat inspector, but I certainly was not an expert on hazardous materials. All right, so next. What happens when this is all done? There's 4 ways a data queue can be closed. Data closed with a correction made, which, and you'll see in my notes when you get this, it says, hey, congratulations, that means you won. Whatever your issue was, most likely you won. They made a correction and you're on your way to being successful with data queue challenges. Closed results entered, that's going to be for an adjudicated citation. Still means that you likely won in some way, shape, or form. And then closed with no data correction made. The state didn't agree with your assessment of the data queue and they closed it, or no response from requester. Happens more often than you think. Somebody will request something and then they don't answer emails or questions that the investigator may have. So eventually, usually within about 2 weeks, they'll close that out. They try and give them more than the 10 days, on average 2 weeks. Okay, next slide. Real quick, I want to show you the success rates, for these things that we've talked about a little bit and more broken down. So for the crashes, when it's assigned to the wrong carrier, happens a lot. 88% of the data is corrected. Now, again, that goes back to 13,000 inspectors, 500,000 crashes. So many of these are worked by your local PD or even a state organization, but they're not certified to check a truck. So they do a long form or a truck bus inspection form is what some states call it. It's just an additional supplemental form. And they do their best to write that stuff down. But, on the side of the trucks, you've got a magnet that might be there. You've got owned by, operated by, DBA. These folks don't know what they're doing. They may not have a driver there to interview. They don't understand how to read shipping papers or logbooks or even call the company. They're not going to do that. They've got to move on. So that's where most of those come from. But they're changed when they're data queued. Not hard to fix that one either. Assigned to a wrong driver, doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen. Again, a crash is pretty typical if you don't know who the driver was at the time. Some of those in that category could also just be simply and people will file it under assigned to the wrong driver, but if the spelling of the name's wrong, OLN for the driver's license number is wrong. We call that an OLN. The date of birth is wrong. That's where you can see those corrections. Not reportable. Huge success rate. Look at these success rates, 88%, 64%, 55%. A duplicate record, you don't want 2 with violations on there in the system. So overwhelmingly, carriers are successful in these data queues. Next slide, please. Those are for crashes. If we talk about RDRs, so inspections, requests for data review, again, just highly successful. With the exception of incorrect violation, and that's when it's a he said usually, and those are really going to be the ones we focus in on today. But even there, you're almost at a 50% data correction rate. I don't know how many of your baseball fans, but that's a heck of a good rate, right? Especially in this, because that's the agency going, yep, we were wrong. We interpreted that incorrectly. They're probably going to make sure their officer knows how to do it right next time. And we're going to take that off your inspection report. That is a win for everybody. Okay, next slide, please. We're going to jump straight into now the teeth of what hopefully all of you are here for today, which is going to be explaining the do's and don'ts of the data queue system and how to prepare a really well-written data queue, what you need to put in there. And I've got some examples for you as well. Let's jump in with the first slide here. Now, this really could have been in another section, but I thought it was more important to have here. It's more of an expectation, but also so you know what the state has to do. So these states get grants from FMCSA, Federal Motor Carrier System, or Federal Motor Carrier Administration, and it comes in a MCSA grant, the Motor Carrier Safety Assistance Program. Sorry, I don't spell them out very often, but the MCSA grant. And it comes in and they get that money and they're required to go do widgets. Widgets are truck inspections. They get money for size and weight through a different source. So those are actually different things. So don't associate those together, which is a great question if anybody has it. And then here's what the state has to do. For DataQs, they have to take a request for data review for 3 years from the date of the inspection, 5 years from the date of the crash. Why is that important? So you know the state has to work this. Even if it's older, still got to work it. It's also important for you to know if it's outside of this time frame, don't bother submitting anything in because that doesn't need to be worked. It's not going to be on your profile. Also, the state doesn't care. So that one will be closed with no action taken. Next slide, please. All right. A couple things that you need to make sure that you have done right to improve your results. I'm going to take the low-hanging fruit here first, and then we're going to jump into some more significant items. I'm going to check and make sure that the report is right, that the state is right. If I would get one and I would look up the report number, see it wasn't in Kansas, now I'm going to have to try and dig through and find out, okay, did they enter the wrong report number? I search my driver in the system. I search your vehicle in my system. I now spend a day, day and a half giving it to my staff to work or doing it myself. Just to find out that it was an Arkansas report, and I went to MCMAS and finally found it. We're going to have to email you back to find it. They're going to do your due diligence, but if you want it to go quickly and accurately and start out on a good note, make sure that report number and that state are right if you have it. A picture can be worth 1,000 words, and we're really going to talk about that and how that can be helpful for you. Again, you want to provide those clear documents, court documents, rental agreements, any piece of paperwork that you have that supports your position. And then finally, for an inspection record request, this is just an example of being patient and setting that expectation. You're going to wait 2 weeks before requesting copy of an inspection, and here's why. So roadside, what happens is they grab their handy dandy computer, their laptop, they knock out the inspection report. They should send it up by that day. Sometimes it goes straight to Fmcsa. Sometimes it goes to what we call a safer server. I know that's more technical than you want, but it goes to the local MCSA folks. They edit it, fix it, try and search and make sure that's the right carrier, make sure the data's good, everything's where it's supposed to be, and then they send it up to Fmcsa a day or two later. In the first process, where it's sent up that first day, it ends up kind of in a holding pattern called safer. Several of you are familiar with it. Safer then shoots that down back to the state. They download it the next day, do all those same corrections, change stuff, this and that. And they upload it back to Safer again. And then finally it results in that big database I told you about called MCMAS. And that feeds all those other sites. So that's why it says to wait 2 weeks, because that process can take a little bit. If it doesn't go through, a guy forgets to send it. It might be a couple weeks before you find it there, but that's a good goal. And that's why it takes so long in the background. All right. Also, just that last note there, if they tell you no, it may be because of some jurisdictional issue where they had to go through the state's Freedom of Information Act. So as it turned out, when I first became the captain, didn't realize it, I was violating state law everywhere. I'll tattle on myself. I don't think there's a statute of limitations that matters in this particular one, but I would just fulfill those, right? I'm like, sure, you have an inspection report. You have an inspection. Everybody gets one. You want one? We'll give it to you. As long as it's yours, not another carrier's, right? What I didn't realize is that our state had a $2 processing fee for our Open Records Act. So the lawyers at the time had to come to tell me I was doing things illegally and I shouldn't be doing that. So at any rate, there could be a situation where they just have to request you do it a different way. All right, best practices. What do you write in your request? What do you do? So you see that where it says you catch more flies with honey. I don't love that phrase, but it's actually pretty applicable here. So be gentle with me on it as you read it. So I'm going to spend some time here talking about this as we go over really the meat and potatoes of what we're here for. So all of you are really in customer service, right? If you're a manager, you want to make your employees happy so they do a good job, or keep them in line so they do a good job. Or if you're being hired to transport someone, you have another boss. So all of us have a boss, and all of us also have to deal with the public. And I think we could all easily admit and agree that from a customer service perspective, when I was a trooper commander doing these, my customer was the driver or the carrier who called in. But from that customer service perspective, even though I start every call with, hey, how can I help you? What's going on? I don't think any of us would say we really listened and we focused in hard and we really thought hard about what that person was telling us. When they started out yelling at us or maybe used expletives in the conversation that aren't in a joking or positive way, they rambled. Your time is important too. So is that other person's, and you took forever to get to your point. People tune out. Or if they're disparaging about another person, the DataQs shouldn't open up and go, hey, your trooper did this. Or when you call, hey, your trooper is a turd because they did this, or a jerk because they did this. That'd be the same thing as if I, as a commander, called you to the company and said, hey, your driver did this. That's not how you open that conversation. Even if you're the most accepting person in the world, your first probably inclination is to defend, right? Whether it's your troopers, whether it's your employees, your spouse, your kid, whoever it is. So that's not how you want to begin that conversation. So when I say you catch more flies with honey, you absolutely do. You want to be kind. You want to be articulate. Doesn't mean you don't want to be very adamant about your position. You do, but there's ways you can do that. You want to be concise, and you have to be your own advocate, highlighting what you believe to be of critical importance in the evidence and that supplemental documentation. And so this second one, I hope no one here gets their feelings ruffled over the sternness of maybe what that slide says or that bullet says. But when talking about evidence, it really needs to be something that we would call compelling evidence. Just to be blunt and honest, nobody cares what your opinion is. Nobody cares what my opinion is if I'm calling in about a data queue that's supposed to be law driven. So if you think about it, what we really want is that law to be applied universally across every state. As soon as a roadside officer says, I'm going to give you a break, well, what did that person they gave a break to, what did they do to the one they didn't give a break to? So now someone who should have had a violation didn't, and someone probably should have did, but what's that do to the SMS and your peer groups? It messes them up. So now you, where you didn't get the favor, and somebody who did are now in skewed SMS groups, they get a better insurance rate. They're not on the compliance review list, and you are for something that shouldn't happen. So we need to be fair across the board. I will tell you anecdotally, many times I've had carriers call, and after we're done sorting out the data queue or whatever, they'll just say, hey, can I talk to you just for a minute? Yeah, sure, absolutely. And we'll talk about the regulation. And there are many times I've said, look, I agree. This regulation is not what it should have been, or maybe not, maybe it's just a dumb regulation, for just plain English. And a lot of law enforcement out there knows they are there. They will agree with you, but they have to enforce it equally across the board. So hang with them. That doesn't mean they're not people and won't talk to you, but just don't open the conversation that way. All right. Some other information. So in your request, when we talk about what you need to highlight, I'm going to take just a crash as an example. Let's say it's a crash that's not preventable, which is also part of the DataQs system. It just goes to Fmcsa rather than the state, right? So if you believe that's the case, then you need to highlight the things on the police accident report that are wrong. And it's really not that hard to find, especially when you have just a normal person working the crash report, a non-inspector or not a reconstructionist, right? They're going to say 2 cars hit like this on their diagram. But their witness statements say 2 cars hit like this. And by God, you couldn't convince them any other way possible, even if you put them right by their cars and say, look, what you're saying is not possible. Well, they've been in a traumatic event. Witnesses are incredibly unreliable. And so especially when it's been that traumatic event, what their head does is take pictures of it, right? But there's gaps. So really you can find that good evidence in the police accident report that you believe to be incorrect. You want to highlight that and point it out. And we're going to, not on a crash, but on an inspection, we're going to do it here in the next slide, or 2 slides from now. So let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. Okay. How can you carrier and driver help themselves? And then that silly phrase again, more flies with honey, it still implies. So let's talk again about, let's just put this in the context of a crash. It applies with an inspection as well. First of all, be kind, be respectful. This is now we're at the driver at the roadside scene, right? What does he need to do? Those are being recorded by law enforcement everywhere. If you're respectful, if you're kind, especially if the officer happens not to be, well, you look like a rock star. And I mean that literally. I mean, you can win cases in court where they play that video, and stories I could tell you where I said stuff I didn't mean to. When I'm in my car, somebody almost hit me. I'm like, gosh darn it, you sucker. Not the word I used, but then I'm in court and I stop and I make contact like, sir, look, hey, are you all right? You almost hit me back there. What's going on? I want to check on you. Totally professional, right? But what does the defense do? Just keeps replaying that. They pulled over correctly, didn't they? So that's a cue for a DUI. And you can just hear me going, you sucker, you almost hit my car. Well, I sound like a jerk. So that's the impression that the jury has of me. And that takes a bit to fix that impression, right? So if you start out that way, huge advantage. Obviously, let's take the crash example, right? Go and make sure the folks are okay. Call 911. The things that come out of your driver's mouth should be, are you all right? Is there anything I can do for you? Do I need to call anybody? Is anybody else in the car hurt? Just that kind of stuff. If they can turn on their phone and record that, do it right away. Train your drivers to do that. Or if you have video and audio in the car, great evidence. You almost always win the data queue. Then the next thing you need to train your drivers, just a legal standpoint, your attorneys would tell you the same thing. Don't offer unsolicited information. It's hard not to do, but make sure your drivers don't say, things like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that light was red, or I didn't realize this, or I forgot to do my check, or the load came off. I should have stopped at that 50-mile mark and checked the load. It just comes out in stressful situations. So just review that with them. But at the same time, boy, listen to when you go contact the person in that other car, because they're going to say some stuff that may really help you prove preventability. So listen, write it down. Whatever you can do to have that useful information when you submit that data queue, huge help to you and your success rate. Again, as we're talking about catching more flies with honey, this is going to apply at the scene that we just talked about. It's going to apply with your initial phone call or request to FMCSA of the state. And again, when that audio and video are reviewed, you're going to sound great when somebody else may not. So if the opportunity presents themselves during an inspection, as an example, stop and ask that officer, hey, you wrote me a violation for, I'm going to do chafing hoses in a minute. It's going to be something we talk about just as a quick example. Hey, can I go out and can I take a picture of that? You told me my tail light's out, my brake light's out, my turn signal's out. Can you show me which one? Can I take a picture of it so my safety guy or I know what to fix, or I know what to put on my post trip, so I know what to do better next time? They should let you. And if they don't, they're going to be the one that doesn't look good. But then you can go back there and you may see that it's the sunlight reflecting off, that it actually is working, and that may cause them to remove the violation. But it gets you the evidence you need. You're going to see this a lot in violation replies. It is a snapshot, a point in time that the condition the truck was in, right? Some standard language that they give back to you. That's because you've taken the picture after you've gotten really what would be the possibility to have it fixed. So bear in mind, we work with a ton of good carriers out there, but unfortunately we also work with the kind of the low-hanging fruit, right? The folks who are not good people, not good guys, that are, really, you can even think of them as criminal enterprises. So they're the ones that we have to guard against. So that's why that snapshot picture in time is taken. You don't take somebody's word for it, gotta be evidence. So to the picture, if you can get the patrol car in it on the side, or if it's date stamped, it's timed, if you could say, officer, could at least get your sleeve in there so we know this is you here at the scene, or it's recorded on their video, and ask them, all those things are great things. That way they know that picture was taken real time. Finally, with pictures in a crash scene, something that's really important when you have that critical incident, if your driver's going to take pictures, there can never be enough pictures, especially with phones today. Here's your two sides of the crash, the beginning and the end. Start at one end, walk all the way through that scene, whether it's your driver or your manager that comes out later, or your insurance person. Turn around and walk slowly all the way back through that scene. You don't take 4 pictures of a vehicle, you take at least 8. The rear of it, quarter panel, side, corner panel, front, quarter panel, all the way around. Same thing with a semi. Focus in on the damage. And then any violations that are shown, focus in on those, and maybe even get a copy of that tow report, or get a copy of that the repair bill from the insurance company to help you prove your case of whether or not something that was pre-existing or was a post-crash incident. And if your mechanic says, hey, there's no way this was pre-existing, this happened because of the crash, when you submit that into your data queue, hey, here's what my mechanic said, do you have a reconstructionist who could take a peek at this and see? That's when they might forward it on to their reconstructionist who wasn't at your property damage crash, and the reconstructionist comes back to the commander and says, no way, that wasn't pre-existing, right? Or it was pre-existing. You were hitting the rear end, that's hot shock. Clearly I can see that tail lamp was on, it wasn't off. This is a post-crash violation. Just the opposite, you're hitting the rear end and the headlight's out. Okay, well, that would have been pre-crash, or at the very least, it wasn't caused because of the crash. And reconstructionists can usually do that real quick, especially if it's worked by a PD officer. You submit that information in, and that will really help you make your case post-crash. So again, what that mechanic says, translate that into, hey, here's what my mechanic said. Do you have somebody else who can take a look and maybe verify that in your data queue? Huge likelihood of success. Next slide, please. All right, let's translate this into a real world example. I picked hoses because, man, this is an easy one, right? We see it all the time. It's stuff that roadside officers mess up all the time. I hope we're doing better. I've trained till I'm blue in the face on this. The out of service language and the handy dandy CVSA out of service criteria. If you don't have a copy, I'm not trying to sell it or pawn it, but it's really helpful for data queues. Is for any damage extending through the reinforcement ply. All right, but that's not what 393.45B2 says. 393.45B2 says required, there's a typo there, sorry, required tubing and hoses are secured against kinking, chafing, and or mechanical damage. Why is the out of service different? Well, because the out of service is to the extent where law enforcement, this is egregious enough for an air leak that law enforcement shouldn't let you go until it's fixed. But let's take out an out of service for that. Again, you can see on the note there, politely ask the inspector where it is. If you can take a picture of it, if they can show you, inspectors are used to that now. You don't argue the point, but you just ask, hey, can you show me where that is? I want to do it right the next time. Does two things. One, you can get the evidence right then and there if you see that it's just chafed and not through the reinforcement ply, which is fantastic. That's going to win your data key right then and there. Let's stop there for just a second. That means that it wasn't extending through the reinforcement supply. With your data key, you can even submit this information. You can say, hey, page whatever the out of service criteria says it has to be reinforcement ply is visible and the ply is frayed, severed, or cut through. That's out of service. Here's a picture. Your officer's car's in the picture, so it was taken at the time of the stop. You can clearly see, we did pictures all the way around it. It is not through the out of enforcement ply. Trooper's even pointing to where it is. You win right then and there. And I can tell you so many times that happened, especially with new inspectors. They just didn't get it. They didn't take the time to go look at the out of service. Another thing that might happen is you might get an inspector who goes, oh, hey, hang on a minute. And they go back to their car. They take your driver with them. You guys look at the out of service together. They're like, shoot, that's not through the enforcement supply. Let me just take this off now. It's still a violation. Maybe you did have some chafing, for example, or maybe it wasn't secured. That you remove it right then and there, print you a new one, you're good to go. Or it gives you that information to challenge it. And then finally, let's say they don't. Say it's a jerk officer not doing what they should be doing, and they just say, I'm not gonna let you get out and take a picture, get your butt in the truck, go. First of all, I hope that never happens, but if it does, and I know that it does sometimes, stop as soon as you can and get that picture taken. And then make sure you put that in that data queue when that standard language wants to come back. It's a snapshot in time. You should have taken the picture then. Your officer didn't let me. I hope he had his video and you can review it and know that our driver asked and the officer said no. We stopped at the nearest truck stop and here are the pictures that we took. Didn't have time to correct that violation. Please take them as best evidence. Again, you look great and you're probably going to win. Next slide, please. Real briefly, let's hit adjudicated citations, a couple other quick things, and we'll take questions. Just know that this is the deal with adjudicated citations. Convicted of the original charge, they're not taken off. Dismissed with punitive court fine, that's where I'm going to spend just a second. Let's say the driver pled guilty for possession of marijuana, alcohol, whatever, but let's say it's a 392.4A violation in possession of drugs or substances. But the guilty plea is removed if they pay a $300 fine plus court cost and doesn't incur any violations for a year. The driver does that. A year later, they'll file the RDR. The officer reviews the court documents. That's not coming off. That's not coming off because the $300 fine plus court costs would allow it to come off. The fine wouldn't. So there was a punitive fine in that case. Another example, a driver paying a fine to the anti-drug fund to have a possession citation dismissed. It happens. That paying a fine to the drug fund should be a punitive thing. They didn't do that just because they wanted to. Then you can see the others there. This chart's included. Dismissed without a fine, it's removed. That's like a not guilty as well. Prosecutor couldn't prove the charge. And then convicted of a lesser charge, they amend it in the safety net. Okay, two quick ones real quick, and then we'll take time for questions. If things don't go as planned and you get a denial back, you do have the opportunity, you see there in the circled area, to add a response or documentation that lets you do that at least once. Although there are some ways you can email back and forth. You can also call. Don't be afraid to call. Our lead agency contacts are listed on our website. That part is open to the public. You don't even have to be a member of CVSA. Just go to cvsa.org. Contacts is in the header. Left-hand side, it'll say lead agency contacts. Phone number should be on your inspection report too. Give them a call. Just ask. Have that same nice conversation. Find out what's going on. They may allow you to resubmit. So, but you can add a response if things don't originally go as planned. And then you can find out what's missing, right? Email gets messed up, but if you can talk to somebody and know exactly what they need, better chance of success. Don't be afraid to make that phone call. If you don't know who to call and it's a Fed, next slide, please. Fmcsa, this is an active link. When you get your slide deck, it works. Those are the field offices. That link will take you right to it. And you can also drill down to the territory or the state that's included and get that division office. And you can call to talk to the division administrator who may be able to help you with the state agency, or if Fmcsa is the one who did the inspection. Let's jump to some commonly asked questions. I'm going to start with the CPDP, the Crash Preventability Determination Program. Is the decision by Fmcsa final? Sure is. unless you discover new evidence that is compelling. Can FMCSA or a state, for that matter, request information if they're working it? Absolutely, they can. They can request anything the carriers are required to maintain under the agency's regulations. What's the status of the request? Especially if you're going through your portal, you're going to see that real time. Where is it at? What's the last email that's gone back and forth? What's the status? And then again, if you're checking the PSP and SMS, up to 60 days for that to update. We talked about it. That's why it takes so long. It's not real time. It is a snapshot every 30 to 60 days. SMS and PSP are within 60 days. You should get that snapshot. Next slide, please. Some commonly asked questions on an inspection report. Is the state decision final? I'm going to say kind of, because the states, unlike FMCSA, actually are required to have some sort of appeal process. In Kansas, it went to a trainer, then a lieutenant, and then to me for a final decision. And we took all those very seriously and had separate conversations about each. Or in some states like Arizona, it goes to an unbiased panel with industry and driver representatives. Can the state request it? Yep, just like FMCSA can. They can request more information. Again, you can see the status of the most recent response through the portal. And then also once it's updated, 60 days within PSP or SMS. One more slide before our question slide. Next. Just a quick little thing I threw together for you. It's in the PowerPoint. You can use it, but it's a program matrix for whether or not to file a crash preventability determination. You can see, follow the arrows. If they're yes, 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 ultimately you should request a review of the crash. And then if any of them kick you out to a no, you really shouldn't. That's also going to help your win rate as well, making sure you challenge good violations. So last slide. This will be on your slide deck. Just want to show you it's here. Helpful websites. More information. The one after this will be my name and web address and phone number. You can always call me, send me an email. Always happy to help. Spent an hour with the guy about a DataQ on the phone today, reference Arizona and Indiana. So always happy to do that. And with that, I'm done and happy to take questions or comments.
Awesome. We have people who have been adding things to chat and the Q&A function. So let's go ahead and get started here. Michael asked, can we data queue warning tickets?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Warning tickets is a little different. It depends what you mean by a warning ticket. And I'm looking over because I see that one as well. First of all, there's no such thing as a warning ticket, but that's really a nomenclature thing, right? So an inspection report is an inspection. There is a violation. That violation might be considered the warning ticket. You have an actual citation that's a ticket, right, that you have to go to court on. And then some states, even if you get a violation on an inspection report, they actually have a physical warning you have to fill out and hand to the driver separately. That traditionally, when you say that's what law enforcement, that third one, thinks of as a warning ticket. But here's what I would say to you to answer, I think, your question getting past this. Anything that is on an inspection report, anything can be challenged. I don't care what the violation is, you may challenge it, but you can also challenge the date, the time, driver's name, your address. By challenge it, you're wanting that data to be corrected. Remember how we opened the conversation with what DataQs is. It's to correct census information. So they got your address wrong, got your driver wrong, absolutely correct it. But any violation that's on an inspection report, if it is not on an inspection report, there's nothing to challenge. If you got a ticket separately, there's nothing to challenge. You're going to win that in court. Has to be on the inspection report. If they wrote you a warning ticket and didn't put it on the inspection report, some side piece of paper that doesn't go anywhere, it has to be on the inspection report. If it's there, you can absolutely challenge it.
Okay. Doug asks, we recently experienced a pedestrian suicide by truck, and we have evidentiary video supporting our driver as well as a supportive police report. Can this be data queued as this is now shown up on our SMS?
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to be one of the crash preventability determination programs as another event, or there might be suicide in there. So I don't have it up right in front of me. So I've got our deck up. Yeah, you can, and feel free to give me a call as well, and I can walk you through that. But yes, suicides is one of the things that, two things. First, it'd be challenged as non-preventable. But honestly, the first thing I would tell you to do is challenge it as not reportable. A lot of folks don't know this. A reportable crash has to be one on a public highway or a thoroughfare, in between two parking lots. But it also has to be a crash, which is a non-intentional event. So someone committing suicide in front of your truck is not a crash. That is an intentional event. There should not even be a crash report taken. Now you may have to pull up the MUC guidelines that I didn't send, but you know what? I'll send it to you as soon as I'm done if you guys want to distribute it. MUC and ANSI D16, those are what determines when a crash has happened. That's not even a crash. Not a crash at all. Shouldn't be on a piece of paper other than an incident report. You will find departments that fight with you terribly about that because they disagree. So then you would go to the crash preventability determination program, file that DataQ. 2 ways you can get it off.
I had a question here. If you have dash cam footage that is over 5 megabits in size, how are you supposed to get that over to the DataQ?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So you might have to email them and ask them separately if that's a way you can get it to them. Other than that, you might need to find a way to either compress it or you're going to need to shorten it to just the absolute relevant pieces. You might even need to break it up into 2 segments. But I do understand their limitation. I can tell you I visited with Jody Lorenzo just the other day about this. FMCSA is working to up that to where it will be a little bit more robust, but as soon as they do it, it won't be enough. So shorten it, compress it, and or send multiple segments and try and get it within that. If not, you might be able to talk to someone and they may be able to take it a different way, either by mail or maybe you could even have a Zoom call where you show it to them. Most folks will be willing to do that if you've got compelling evidence.
Okay. We have a question, don't have a name on this one. Where do I find detailed criteria on crash preventability? That was included in the handouts that you provided. That actually went out on a link to everyone on your reminder for the event today. There's a ton of information that Chris put together for everyone on this call already. It is included in there along with a lot of other good information, and he's even given us more information since we put that first batch together. So we're going to have a second batch together of those things as well, because we want to make sure that you all have these details and can use them in defense of your organization and your drivers. So let me see here. So he had specifically, or she, I'm not going to say it was just a he, police accident report incident indicates that our CMV was struck at the 8 o'clock position. To be eligible for this crash type, the CMV needs to be struck in the 5 or 7 o'clock position. So I guess there was, per the determination program, that was saying that their vehicle was not eligible for participation in that. So
yeah, you didn't meet the criteria. The problem, and think of it this way: they started with just a few criteria. The second time they expanded this out from the original study to the determination program, they added criteria. The one they didn't add was struck in the side. Just way too complex for them to be able to handle and determine whose fault it was, especially if you're just traveling along 2 lanes. That ends up so much a he said, and nothing's ever changed without compelling evidence, and you don't have it. So while I realize that does not take into account sometimes when you're just straight up hit on the side and it's clearly not your fault, that is where FMCSA drew the line. So that wouldn't meet one of the, I think it's 10 possible things that you can challenge under there. And to that other person, yeah, there's a ton of stuff. If anybody wants to give me a call or email me separately, I can help send you material. I'm definitely not your trucking company safety person, but more than happy to help get you going the right way, because we do want to see you be successful.
Colin went ahead and shared that link again in chat just now for those of you that may have missed that on that reminder. And I know that some of you are watching your watch. Those of you who've taken the time to answer questions, we're going to go through every one of these that we've got. So if you have questions coming, we will keep working on this and keep this event going until we're able to get answers and responses. So let's hit our next question here. With COVID being an excuse for officers, I've had officers not provide signed inspections or tell a driver they are okay to leave, and then the inspection shows us on our inspection list with violations. How is this legitimate? I guess, what is the guidance that's being given to officers in terms of COVID? I know we talked a little bit about that back in May, about what officers don't want to have to be doing to inspect drivers, get rods, things like that, not get in the cab of the truck, and so forth.
Yeah, so, and that's a great question. I really appreciate it. So we do have our COVID protocol that we kicked out, as well as departments. They're going to have their own individual protocols. That's going to change department to department, so I can't speak to all of them. But as a general rule, we want folks to keep that safe distance, not to get in the cab if they don't have to. Try not to get super close to the driver unless they have to maintain that social distance. It's for their protection as well as your drivers. And especially right now with all the stuff going around with COVID, we don't know where people feel where they feel about it. We didn't have feelings when I started being a trooper for 25 years ago, but a lot of folks do now. And we want to make sure that everybody's comfortable and don't know where that line is all the time. So I do understand your situation. There's really no requirement actually that a motor carrier per se sign it. It has to be sent to them as the driver do. It does have to be signed when it's returned, or for the inspector to necessarily sign it. That's going to depend on their own policy. But certainly we don't want folks not doing a good job interacting with that driver, but it's really going to be an agency by agency policy. There's no federal guidance that they're required to follow during an inspection. Wish I had a better answer for you on that one. We do recommend social distancing, but we still recommend completing a thorough inspection just like they always have. Sometimes those two things don't go well together in a particular department.
Gotcha. All right. Now I have a bit of a longer one here. In September, one of our drivers got stopped and got a violation for using personal conveyance while looking for safe parking at around 10 p.m. at night. The driver, he first stopped at one truck stop. It was full. He then moved on to a rest area. It was also full. And then the app that they were using indicated that there was another truck stop about 39 miles down the road, and the driver went to that location, and that is where they got tagged for the hours of service violation. And the officer handling the DataQ said that there was a way station with shoulder parking that was available, but this was a driver that was looking at a 10-hour break, and that another truck stop was also available, but this was not one that was on whatever app they were using at the time. They've sent the footage that the truck stop was full. They've sent the GPS to show that this was not to the benefit of the company. It was just trying to get safe parking. They've got the logbooks. What can this company do to put this in DataQ?
Yeah, this is a tough one, and I don't know if you've already DataQ'd it or not. It sounds like maybe you have. So first of all, personal conveyance is new, relatively speaking, in the life of FMCSA, and I think it's done a lot of good for carriers and drivers when they're out of hours to get somewhere safe. It's also created a really big confusion roadside as well. I can tell you generally how it is enforced and how it should be enforced. So in this circumstance, the first location you were trying to get to as a safe haven as you run out of hours is now full. Okay, that's what PC is for. You go to the next one, it's full. And then you come across a way station. I'm going to go back to the way station. You come across another rest area, but it's not on your app. I'll go back to that too. And then you eventually get to a rest area that is suitable, meaning it has services for a 10-hour break, a restroom, and something to eat or drink. And then it's a safe place for you to rest. Okay, so let's take these in order. The one with the way station, especially if it's a 10-hour break and it's shoulder parking, probably not a lot of credibility there. While they could really stringently enforce the PC and say you should have stopped there, I think you can make a really good argument that that's really not a safe haven. It's not a safe location for your driver to take a 10-hour break. It sounds like to me you can articulate that very well with the evidence he's presented. Present it concisely and in that way. But here, unfortunately, is where I think your DataQ fails. And I realize this is probably not a popular thing to say, but it's that app, and I went on to the next rest area where I passed one that was viable. That's where you're going to lose this, and probably should, because even though I understand it wasn't an app you were using, that doesn't relieve the possibility that now you're out of hours. We're using PC to get you somewhere safe, and you skipped somewhere safe. So regardless of why that happened, it could even be I saw it and I missed my exit. That one you might get through, but generally speaking on that one, you're probably not going to be successful in the DataQ. Maybe that's a policy decision that you need to visit with FMCSA about, or come to CVSA and we can submit a request for clarification from FMCSA or guidance. But right now that's where that would fall. Not because of the way station per se, but because of the next rest area that you didn't take for whatever reason that may be. And here it was because it was on an app, I think, not on an app.
Okay, we've got a couple questions here involving trucks catching on fire.
Yes.
If you have a truck catches fire, burns up, a company receives accident report listing as non-preventable against the company on the portal. Can it be data queued in the preventable program to be changed to non-preventable?
Two things. So it's a reportable and non-reportable, and then preventability program. I don't remember if that's one of the categories off the cuff. I don't believe that it is on the non-preventable. So let's deal with, is it a crash or not? It unfortunately is a crash. Any motor vehicle in transit and then a fire is going to meet the requirements for a crash. And in this circumstance, it almost always has to be towed. So that's where you get stuck with it being a reportable crash. It's going to be something that happened in transit on a roadway, public roadway. There's damage. First harmful event is going to be going down the road. It's going to be fire. And the most harmful event will also be the fire. And there's going to be a tow truck that meets all the criteria. It's going to be one that you have to comply with. As far as preventability, I don't think a fire is on there, but I'll double check that when we're done just to make sure, but I don't think a fire is on there. If somebody knows that it is, correct me.
Gotcha. All right, here. Got some more for you. Dun, dun, dun. A couple folks with fires.
Yeah, fire stink. And that happened a lot.
I'm going to go ahead and put your contact information back up on the screen because some folks are asking for it as we go through this.
And please feel free to call or email. Happy to visit.
We did talk about the guidance on court citations when it's dismissed upon payment of cost. You actually gave us that chart that showed the punitive fine versus the non-punitive fine and which gets removed and which doesn't.
And I did include in your material a little more information on the adjudicated citation that you can read through. And if you have any tough ones on that, again, feel free to email or call.
Awesome. All right. Here.
Maybe I should, if I could, just real quick there.
Sure, absolutely. We've got time.
There's something different that goes on with masking, which we may be able to talk about, and it's its own class that I teach for 3 days. But a state can't mask either. But when they talk about masking, it can't mask a conviction. Just something you should just everybody should know. A conviction, what we normally think of, that's going to be a guilty from a judge or a guilty from a jury, right? But that's not what happens for the definition of conviction for the feds for masking. Their definition of conviction is actually really broad. It is those things, conviction by a jury or a judge, but it's also any administrative hearing that you lose. So a DUI admin hearing, a hearing where you're suspended because you're not healthy anymore, maybe a medical one for epilepsy, or you could even have a diversion, which is what we're talking about here, that counts as a conviction under masking. So you have a couple of competing things that can mess with the DataQ program when it comes to that. And I know there's some stress with Indiana and Missouri. I'll go ahead and name the states. That's just because of how they understand masking. And we just haven't got a great answer from FMCSA. And it is one of those things that tends to change administration from administration, right or wrong, fair or not. And so we haven't locked them down on an answer yet, but know that we are trying. If you want to try as well, maybe that would help promote some progress there so we get an answer. We don't care what the answer is. We just want the answer so we can appropriately deal with the data queue.
All right, here. More questions. Keep them coming, folks. Challenged the same crash twice. First time, we were struck by a vehicle that failed to stop at a traffic control device. I was told a yield sign, though, is not a traffic control device. Then I filed it under vehicle that failed to stop or slow in traffic, and that still failed because they're saying the other vehicle didn't need to stop at the yield sign. And I just don't understand how a yield sign is not a traffic control device.
I would certainly argue that it is a traffic control device, but I think what they mean by traffic control device is going to be something that's a stop sign or a stoplight rather than a yield sign. But I would certainly argue that a traffic control device is a yield sign in that regard. I think you're right there, but I do believe they actually interpret that differently, a little bit like a conviction, that we may think of it in one way, but generally speaking, they interpret it a different way, meaning that it is not per se a traffic control device, even though I would agree with you that it is.
All right. We had an instance where we were flagged for HOS violations where there were none. We train our drivers to never argue with the cops, but there was clearly an error made that I provided proof. And now I'm being told that that our records have been altered. Or I guess that is the reason that they're not choosing to look at that information is they are claiming that those are altered rods for that particular driver.
Oh my, yeah, that's one where I would recommend a phone call if you haven't already, and you can always call me and we can visit about it as well. We certainly do get things that are altered. You know, back when we used fax machines, just so you know, if you highlight something in white and fax it, you might as well highlight it in yellow and fax it. That didn't work. But now we're in a different age, right? Things can be changed. But unless they have a picture or a snapshot, or they took the logs, if it's an ELD and they had that transmission, and then something changed after the fact, they should be accepting that as the legitimate thing to what happened there. So I guess I'd say two things. One, it's worth a phone call to find out what exactly the contention is. Again, approach it as, hey, I just want to know what's going on. I really feel like we're right, but can you explain to me where you guys are coming from? It could also, I mean, double check. I mean, I hate to say it, but double check that there wasn't an alteration between your driver and what they gave to the inspector. I mean, obviously you guys are going to have records of that in the back end of the ELD if it is one, but certainly if it's a paper log or an AOBRD, make those changes. Sounds like there's some details I'm missing here that might be helpful for me to talk about it. So feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call. But definitely I would recommend calling that jurisdiction and saying, hey, you know, what's going on? We really feel like we're right. Can you talk to me about where the stumbling block is? I think you'll have a lot of success there.
All right. The state of Illinois has a duplicate accident reported against us. I did a challenge. It's been 4 months and they have not responded. Is there a different way to report this challenge for this duplicate crash event?
Yeah, that's one where, if you remember my slides, it had the information for the Fmcsa field office. Absolutely. That's one. So Illinois should be doing it. I know the folks up there who are doing it, sounds like they're behind. That's one where I would call the Fmcsa field office and absolutely show them that that's a duplicate crash. Now be careful with the crash, and maybe this is something I can help you with too. When you say duplicate, if it's the exact same crash, same vehicle, same everything, that likely is the same crash. If it is, you know, I had a terrible one time where a semi was listed on 3 separate crashes and 3 separate fatalities, and it was the worst thing ever. And I've been part of some 28 car pileups, but this one was because everything stayed in motion, right? So it's not a separate crash until everything has ceased being in motion. So we had one crash that was the fatal. Had somebody else come back up, and the first crash is still moving around, hit the semi. That's fatal number 2. Everything's still moving around from that crash, hits the semi. That's fatal number 3. Looks like a duplicate record. Those are 3 individual fatalities. A terrible, tragic event. Awful, but it was actually reported correctly. So not sure which one you have going on, but if it's legitimately one crash that's a duplicate and the state's being pokey with it, that's where you reach out to Fmcsa on that list that I gave you. Reach out to the Illinois Division Office. I know who that's going to be. The division officer is Dan Meyer. He actually was the commander of Kansas before me. He knows this crash stuff every bit as well as I do. Maybe his SPM that you talk to, but then they can reach out to the state and help facilitate that conversation. Could have just gotten lost in somebody's email too. So you may just need to give the state a call and say, hey, can you work this for me? But that should be removed. We don't want duplicates.
I didn't know that was the way that was handled with the crashes. If the vehicles remain in motion and strike additional vehicles, that becomes a potential to become separate crash reports.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
All right. I was denied preventability for a DOT reportable accident where the other party came into my driver's lane and hit him on the driver's side door. I even sent dash cam evidence. I was denied due to the way the officer wrote it up. None of the accident descriptions matched the write-up. So essentially, it was denied. Do they have any options to appeal
that? Yes. So 2 questions. First, 2 answers. First, I double-checked the fire thing. That's not something that can be done in the crash preventability program. So it has to be done on whether or not it's reportable. It likely is. So you can't challenge that there. To your question, yes, this can be appealed. On the police accident report, the way you would argue that would be through your pictures of the damage or through your mechanic's bid of what was repaired. Now that will show what you had to have fixed and where you were struck. Although I think I'm hearing it struck basically at the driver's side, and I'm looking at the different types of that. That's not struck in the rear. It's not side at rear. Could be wrong direction, but think of what they mean by wrong direction is they mean going the wrong way in your lane of traffic. Doesn't mean coming across wrong direction. It could be an illegal turn. That's possible. So it just makes sure that you're in the right category. And then if you want to appeal it with that more compelling evidence, when you resubmit it, reference your previous DataQ or reopen it. If you can do that once. and then submit those pictures where the damage is, submit that information from your bid to have your truck or your vehicle fixed, and then explain why you believe it should be removed one more time, but stay focused on what you're talking about. One, point out which one of the categories it is, and then why it was preventable, and just use the language right out of that category. Struck in the rear, as an example, the vehicle that struck the CMV was driving directly behind the CMV and failed to stop in time. That's the exact language you want to use. Use their own words against them in this context to your benefit. But I'm just not sure that that meets the criteria, because it might be kind of a struck in the side example. And if it's not to do with the turn, it may not qualify.
All right, here, speaking of wrong direction, car swerved, hit a wall, and then spun around and came back towards our driver's direction, the driver of the truck going in the correct direction. I was denied my challenge when choosing other motorists driving in the wrong direction as the reason. It needed the other car to be driving south on north or vice versa, but the other car spun and came into our lane. How would that not be operating in the wrong direction?
Well, if you think of it, these terms, they're not operating in it anymore. They're spinning around and they got in front of you and got hit. So operating in the wrong direction means that driver has to have actively gone the wrong direction, the opposing lane of traffic toward you. So a 2-lane road, they come over into your lane, strike you, that's going to count in the wrong direction. God forbid it happens on the internet. I was training a trooper and I'm like, hey, there's a car in our lane coming down I-35 at us right now. Do you maybe see that? So that was the morning I got 4 new flat tires. He flat spotted all 4 of them. We chased down that car going down the road. Eventually I had to say stop. My captain calls me the next day and says, why did you buy 8 tires in 2 days? And I had to explain that situation because my rookie sucks. So at any rate, that is not wrong direction. Now they spin out, they go in front of you and went the wrong direction. Now you can try that as an other potentially. Now others usually reserved for, the skydiver who jumped out of the plane and their chute didn't open and they landed on top of you. And I was trying to look and see if there was another one there that really might work. And if you take a look at the CPDP eligibility guide I sent you, that should help really go through those. But I thought there was one that talked about that, but I'm just not seeing it. They do have wrong direction, and this might be the one you're thinking of. Wrong direction, where a vehicle is traveling in the wrong direction. You get 2 vehicles traveling in the same direction, another vehicle traveling in the wrong direction. So 3 units total, right? You're in the right lane, another vehicle beside you in the left lane, car coming the wrong way, hits the car beside you, shoves it into you, and you hit it. That is all because the very first vehicle was going in the wrong direction and hit that other car. I can't actually think of a criteria you fit in the CPDP without that example. So just them spinning out and then ending up in front of you and you hit them, I don't think that's going to count as part of their program. I'm not saying it shouldn't. I'm not saying it wasn't preventable because I think it was non-preventable. It's just not part of their criteria right now.
All right. What's the next level of data queue review or appeal if the initial data queue request was not correctly processed? The data queue representative changed the name of the initial violation and the amended of a different charge note was not listed.
I'm going to come back to that one real quick. Sorry, you may have to read it again. Spin out into a CMV's lane. If you actually look, I just found it on the guide, is not eligible. So vehicle spins out into the CMV's lane is not going to be eligible. It actually specifically says it. So I just want to make sure I circle back and close that one off. I'm sorry. So what was that next question there? It was data queue.
So the data queue representative changed the name of the initial violation, but the amended of a different charge note was not included. So initial.
So I'm not sure I have enough there. I don't know if it's just a data queue or if it was an adjudicated citation. Adjudicated citation. Go ahead.
No, you're good. So if that's what we have, that's what we have. So
yeah, an adjudicated citation is going to be where they change the severity level. Changing the name of it, I've done that personally a couple of times. I know what happens is if they amend it, and this is sometimes when it's not good for the carrier, or it could be, where they agree that violation wasn't there, but based on what you submitted, that it was a violation, the officer just wrote it down wrong. It should be closed with action taken. The other type of closure that you're talking about is supposed to refer to a adjudicated citation. So I think what you're wanting them to change that to is closed with an action taken. Although that might not have been the action you wanted, like if they, they didn't remove it and they changed it to a more appropriate violation, that would still be a closed with action taken.
Okay, she did clarify that it was an adjudicated citation.
Okay, then yeah, then that one should be, that's wrong. It should be closed with the SMS point change. That's going to be number 2 on that list I sent you, or number 3 on the list I sent you. But if not, just reach out to them or email them back to them and see if they'll close it the different way. It doesn't matter how it says it's closed though. So don't get wound up about that if they won't change it. As long as they made that change to the actual inspection report in safety net and it's uploaded and you can see it, it doesn't matter what the DataQ says. It just matters that they change the data appropriately.
All right. Is there a way to dismiss vehicle maintenance violations? Every single one we submit comes back with the response that the violation was correct at the time of inspection, even though the light, for example, was on when the driver stepped out to see why he got a violation for it. The officer claimed that it was off while he was printing the report.
Yeah, so this is one we're taking that picture. Driver's walking back, snap a picture of the patrol car, even if they don't want you to. Other than they can tell you to get back in the truck and you'd have to follow that lawful order, still have to do what we're asked to do by law enforcement, me included. I'm a normal civilian now, so I got to do tell me. But there's nothing illegal about you filming anything or taking a picture. Obviously, I prefaced it with saying, hey, is it all right if I take a picture? Because that comes out a little better. And you do have those cops who, even though it's your constitutional right, you can video whatever you want up until, you can't if you're arrested. But clearly not the circumstance here. Now I'm just rambling a little bit, but yeah, go back and take that picture. Just ask them. And then if not, do it as quick as you can when they leave and go away, and try and get that time stamped or date stamped. Vehicle violation should go away. Now, here's one where you really do have to have compelling evidence. This is why those pictures, a repair bill. Let's say you take that in pretty quick to a repair person and they, swear out a note or an affidavit saying, hey, this is working. I don't know why the officer said it wasn't. Also remember, you can request that officer's video. Let's say they didn't want to review it and they're being knuckleheads about it. And you get a knucklehead data reviewer asked to appeal it, get it in somebody else's hands. Also take the initiative, whether it's you or a third party. Lawyers make a lot of money doing this, but you can do these on your own pretty easy because you got a 3-year and a 5-year window to do it, right? If you send a note saying I want a copy of the video, they send you a note back saying that's $75. You send the $75, they send you the DVD. We're looking at 3 months time now. You play the DVD. Sure as heck, you can see that light's working. You send that DVD back in with that little clip of that working with your inspection report. Dang, you win right then and there. And they were too lazy to go look at it on the video. But and I've certainly had that happen. Been a part of that circumstance where that happened. We changed it out. Now in that case, it wasn't because we refused to look at the video. It's because we called and looked at the video. But just ask if they take a look at that video. If the driver didn't have one, meaning the inspector didn't have one, go back there and take that picture. Past that, unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do. But this really comes down to what we talked about, training your drivers, knowing what to do right off the bat or how to engage with that officer to get better information roadside, or even getting the officer on his own video, because they're mostly mic'd up, to say, yep, it's the right rear light. I can't let you go look at it right now. That'll help a lot during the DataQ. So again, it's really a conversation that your driver should have with the inspector. And if done well or done correctly, politely, essentially, it should go well on the side of the road. Don't argue about it, but try and engage them in conversation.
Gotcha. Now, Mark, you've been very good today. I know you've got questions, things you'd like to throw Chris's way.
Well, we've covered so much ground here. I guess one of the chat comments was, will there ever be an expansion of the eligibility criteria for the crash preventability? Is it locked down, or is there some?
I think the answer to that's going to be yes. Especially the person that helped create it, Joe DiLorenzo, know him very well, Jack Van Steenberg. I think the anticipation is that there will be an expansion. And I guess one of the things I didn't say on the crash preventability is they're taking like 6 months to work these. We tried to tell them, hey, be careful what you wish for. I know you want companies to be able to do this, but spool up on your side, hire staff, get ready to go because you're going to get waylaid. They're like, yeah, sure, we got it. They're the government. They know they're here to help. Well, sure enough, what happens? They got waylaid. So they're 6 months behind playing catch up every day. That's why theirs are taking so long. So until they get a handle on that, they're not going to expand it. But in conversations I have had with them, I think they would like to expand it, narrow it, refocus it. Really, I mean, their goal, just like ours, is if it wasn't preventable and it shouldn't count toward your crash basic or any other thing you've got going on, we don't want it to. It's bad data. If you give us crap data or we record junk data, it doesn't help us make good rules. Us, FMCSA, law enforcement, industry, doesn't give us good rules to live by or to make us safer. That's just a dumb rule based on dumb and bad information. We don't want that either.
Excellent. Whew, all right. Well, we have covered a lot of ground today. So thank you, everybody, for participating in this. We were very excited to put this on. This is actually has been 4 months in the making. We had a webinar where we talked about road check back with Chris in May, and he brought up DataQ, and our chat box lit up by people going, DataQ, 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 and we knew we were onto something. It's just unfortunate that CVSA keeps Chris rather very busy putting on other events of their own, additional inspection events and so forth. And this is finally the chance that our schedules were able to come together and make this happen. So Chris, thank you so much. This has been a ton of good information today, and I appreciate it. For those of you who've been on the call, we have been recording this. We will be providing the replay and a follow-up email to everyone, along with the links to the supplementary items that Chris provided to us. I know one of the things, accident response training and inspection response training, that's what we do. If you have training that you want to provide to drivers to, talk about taking footage, how to take footage intelligently, the things they should be recording on their cameras and so forth. That's a perfect example of what our platform can be used for with Infinity Workforce. If you're not familiar with our platform, we do have that available in a trial program so that you can actually kick the tires and give that a whirl. I believe I have a poll question. If you'd like information about that, let us know. We can get that to you. If you'd like information about our sister company, bettertruckdrivingjobs.com as well for a free year of job postings, please let us know. But otherwise, Chris, Mark, thank you all again so much for your time today. Those of you on the call, I had Chris's contact information up there. So please reach out to him. He's a great source of information. He can help you out. So please take advantage of him as a resource, y'all. He's here to help us have right data and make sure the government knows exactly what we're doing correctly. It takes work, it takes time, but that's why he's here. That's his life now. So.
It is.
Flies can be caught using honey is recommended.
Yes.
It'll work. I promise.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, everyone. Well, be safe out there. We'll send the follow-up out to you shortly. And thank you again.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you all.
Sir.
Be safe.